Could you talk a little bit more about just the dads, daughters, and dating?
Yeah. So I just wonder what that whole experience is like to go through that as a father, to have your daughter get engaged.
Well, a lot depends, Luke. Do you like the boy?
What would you tell other men who are going through or eventually will go through that as well? Like, all of us are going to experience that. Welcome to Dad Pod. I'm Mike.
And I'm Luke. We're friends here in Madison, and we both have kids. And at least for us, becoming a dad has been transformational. We talk to all sorts of dads in all sorts of situations to learn from their unique challenges, lessons, and evolutions. The goal is simple: learn from each other to become better dads.
If you dig it, please find us on Apple or Spotify and click follow. That single click helps put us in front of more dads, which Luke would really appreciate.
All right, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of the Dad Pod. And we are here today with our very good friend, Matt. Matt has a super interesting background. He's one of the most preeminent investors in the health tech space, having invested in over 100 companies. Most importantly for today's podcast, he's a loving father and husband. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
From your bunker in St. Louis. So where we thought we could get started is just to hear, what is your overall strategy when you think about what you're trying to do as a father as it relates to your kids? How would you describe what your fathering strategy is?
Yeah, if I had to answer that question, I'd say I try to do three things. Number one, I try to talk to my kids as adults. If it didn't work, I had to bring the conversation down to a level where they could get to and understand. Number two, I always tried to trust them until they proved me otherwise wrong. And then we had to revisit those rules. And then number three, I tried to show my focus on family by prioritizing downtime, weekends, vacations, to be with family, whether it's just my daughters and my wife, but quite often we would vacation with my parents. So the importance of family is weaved through, I think, our family narrative.
How did you develop those as your three go-to? What was their kind of boil it down process?
Luke, this is the example of when you're going through the front windshield, you don't know, it doesn't make sense, but in the rear view mirror, it comes together nicely. And I'll tell you a great story. So my kids were little. We'd go to the place where I play tennis and they go swimming. And we play monkey in the middle, and I was the biggest kid. So I'd be start off in the middle, and my kids are like 5 and 6, and they'd be saying, "Matt!" And these women who are around the pool look at me and say, "Are they your stepchildren, sir?" I know, they're my kids. Well, why are they calling you Matt? It's my name. They're not saying it disrespectfully. It's my name. They could call me Matt if they do it respectfully. So my kids call us Matt and Lisa.
That's awesome. I've always thought about the concept as extending trust. And I think that I've learned that the hard way of what it's like to not extend trust, or what it's like to be on the other side of that. I'm interested, how has that played out? Kind of what were the times when it worked, and what were the times perhaps that may have backfired or been more tricky?
So I'm really lucky. My kids are really good kids, and it's mostly worked all the time. So right when my kids have downtime, what do they want to do? They want to spend it with their family. So we've had very few incidents. I can't even really think of any where that trust barrier was broken, but you let out more leash, right? As when you have little kids, it's little things. As the kids get older, it's big things. And it comes down to, when they start driving, when they start getting interested in finding dating, when they have curfews. And you're very focused on, there are some rules. We'll explain the rules and why they're important. And my kids, for the most part, have lived by those rules, and they've incorporated it into their lives as they're 23 and 24 today.
Could you talk a little bit more about that first principle as well? So, because that is something I think about in terms of, I recall specific situations from my childhood where people talked to me like I was just on equal footing with them, and I really responded to that. And so that's something that through the thread of my life, I've kind of always respected when people did that. And I'm curious, kind of from your parental perspective, how you utilize that, how that played out with as your kids grew.
I just think it's the way I'm wired, right? I'm wired to be a teacher, to explain things, not to just dictate this is how it's going to be. And that's how I'm wired. And I try to explain it. If it didn't make sense, it was up to them to say, I don't get it. Having girls is different than boys. I come from a family with two boys, two girls. These young ladies are negotiating savants. So, what you realize quite quickly is, mom's always going to say yes, dad's always going to say no. Let's just go to mom first. We don't even need to talk to dad. Unless mom says no, and then we'll try dad. So the first question is always, have you discussed this before with your mother? And that's how these things sort of play out, and you learn about each kid, and they're learning some life skills. Because eventually they're going to be in school, they're going to be working, they're going to be in groups and communities that have pecking orders. And if you treat everyone with respect, whether it be the elder, or whether it be someone underneath you, those are life skills that I think speak volumes about who you are.
I think that's interesting to hear you explain it through the lens of it's a way to instill a principle of respect. That really resonates. It makes me, to digress slightly, it reminded me of a very clear lesson. My dad was not into lessons, but every now and then he would drop one. And he was a small town lawyer. So one of those like hang a shingle, people coming off the street, 7,000 person town. There's not that, everybody knows everybody. So your reputation is kind of everything. And I remember him very specifically telling me, he's like, the most powerful people in my world as a lawyer is everybody's secretary. When you step foot and come into an office, a business, whatever it might be, those are the people who decide whether your question or request goes on the top of the pile or the bottom of the pile. And how you treat those people is one of the most telling things about your character. And it was exactly what you're talking about, this lesson of respect.
Yeah, my kids see it all the time. I remember when I was a kid, my grandfather was the supervisor of a town in the Catskills in New York called South Fallsburg. And he knows everyone in the town, and I would walk around with him. We'd go into the bank. He'd say hello to everyone. How are you doing? Everything okay? And that's just a way of treating everyone with respect. I love food. We go to restaurants, the ones I really like. I try to get to know the people who work there. And they treat you treat them with respect. They treat you with respect, which embarrasses my kids a little bit. But when they bring something extra, it makes them feel good.
The proof is literally in the pudding.
Yes.
Going along with that, did you have to help them understand that there's an amount of proactivity or initiation required from your kids in this situation, where you're giving them trust, you're kind of talking to them at, starting from the highest level, you're talking to them, and they have to be the one to raise their hand to say, hey, I need you to clarify that, or hey, I have this question. It requires them to take a kind of a step. That's what I'm hearing.
That's the way I operated. But remember, each family dynamic is different. And in my family, I would argue, my wife is the CEO of the house. I may be the chairman of the board, but she's the glue that holds it together. She's the one who gave up her career to say, I want to raise our 2 kids to make sure they're great people, so we get excited about the future of the world. So she was always the first line of defense. She was always around. She was the one active in school. She was the one who bonded with them and got to know their friends to make sure you picking good friends, because if not, that's not me. Now, I was the fun guy, right? I remember going to parent-teacher night for our oldest daughter in 1st grade. Each kid wrote a letter to their parents on the door. And we go, let's find our daughter's letter. And the letter reads something like this. Mom and Dad, I love you so much. Mom, you cook for us. You clean. You take us around. You are awesome. Dad, you are so much fun. When you're around, we're playing kickball, soccer. We do all this fun stuff. And my wife is like, they view me as the maid. And I'm like, no, you're getting the view of a 6-year-old. And over time, that view changes, and she has become the glue or the centerpiece, and I'm more in the background. But it's about knowing your role in the relationship, Mike. All right, I wasn't the front line. I was maybe the second line.
I'm always interested how people get to that conclusion. You know, was that a discussion you had? Was it before you had kids, during kids? How did you figure that out?
That's a great question. Great question, Luke. So we were living in Manhattan. We had 1 kid. My wife went back to work 4 days a week. We hired a nanny to come in and oversee things. But she realized the 5th day when she was off, supposed to be with the kid, she was getting bombarded with work. We had our 2nd kid 17 months later, and I said to her, it's up to you to determine what you want to do. If you want to keep working, I'm supportive. If you want to stay home with the kids, I'm supportive. We'll make it work either way. I did that. To me, was not my decision, because it wasn't my play forward it wasn't my life that was being affected. And she made the decision with my full support, and she's loved doing it. And she is as close to my daughters as anyone could be. And she, as I said, is the glue to our family. I don't think you can know before you get there, Luke, and is another way of saying it, because things change.
100%. Yeah.
Were there any challenges that you ran into in that type of division of labor?
Of course there are challenges, Mike. When you have the point person doing stuff that you don't agree with, there are usually challenges. Right? I like to joke. My wife and I didn't have a fight till we had kids.
Can relate
and
to
we're
that.
very different. We're complements. We are not very similar. So we approach things very differently, but our values and where we want to end up is very similar. But there are some times when Luke, you're the CEO. You're doing things, making decisions where if you're not the CEO, that's the CEO's call. You just got to bite your tongue and say, maybe that's a private conversation, maybe. But I think you just got to understand your role in the family unit, and you got to play that role if that's the team approach you've set up.
So is that then the route you took was, hey, this item falls into my area. I'll hear what you have to say, but then I'm going to make the call and you're going to live with it. Or did you, was there, did you have a way to resolve?
Sure. I don't think it's as black and white as that. I think there are some areas that are clearly in each other's area of expertise. So in my house, right, I pay the bills. My wife she's the amazing chef. If someone's going to say, for my birthday, I'd like to do this, that's going to go to my wife. I have no role in that. I'm like, sure. But there are some areas where you're treading on dangerous or tenuous ground. You've got to be self-aware enough to say, why don't I solicit my partner for their input on this before I decide? Yeah. And the best thing about this is these are a lot of the same behaviors that my parents modeled for me. My parents, my wife calls them we calls us the Donna Reed family, because I lived in a world that everything worked the way I thought it should, and we're trying to replicate that, maybe improve it on the margins, but it really worked and worked well. So no need to rewrite or recreate something that I had firsthand knowledge for growing up and how it worked.
You're hitting on something that through the process of this podcast, I've really come to really be fascinated by this. The way I've thought about it is, for some of us, we were lucky enough to be born into a family environment where it allows us to kind of innately trust our parenting instinct. You know, when we think back and we say, oh, the way I was brought up, generally thumbs up, right? Like, did a pretty good job. Versus there's plenty of people out there, when you ask that question, their response is literally, my intuition, I basically do the opposite. Because how I was brought up, right, I so deeply disagree with. So it's really interesting. You know, at the beginning of this part of the conversation, we were asking, where do these three things come from? And now it's making sense. You know, it's like, really where these things came from is your intuition. And you're part of this, you're part of the population where you could deeply trust your parenting intuition because you trusted where you came from.
That's well said, Luke. And my wife had a different growing up experience, right? And it's why I think I've get involved as a mentor today. It's because you've got these experiences that have worked, and you want to share them to increase the probability of success for others out there.
Totally. You kind of mentioned it the first time. You referenced the CEO versus the chairman role here. And you've been a prolific investor. You've literally invested in over 100 companies. What have you taken from that experience, and in what ways do you think it's tangibly impacted the way you are a dad?
I think being a parent and being an investor or CEO, because in effect I was like the CEO of the fund, they're very synergistic. They create and put different pressures or stresses on you, but the way you respond to those are very similar. How do I prioritize our time or my time? Are we running after the right thing right now? I think they make the other side of you stronger. And I also think they made me more aware, like when my wife would travel, when I was a single parent, about the single parents on my team and how much harder their life is than those who come from a more traditional family environment. I was able, because of our situation and my wife, to put my all 100%, 150% into what I was doing during the week, and I did. But for some people, they can't do that. And having that self-awareness, being able to see things from the other side, these are all important life skills that make you a better parent, better executive, better entrepreneur, better investor.
Yeah. Did you see were there any, again, thinking about having a kind of view into all these different companies, all these different leaders, all these different executives, were there any moments of like, oh, I'm definitely not going to do that? Kind of seeing patterns or seeing behaviors where you kind of had the ability to see things that don't work?
As a parent or as an investor, or both?
Both, yeah.
I think it's much easier when you're dealing adult to adult and you know you're an investor in a venture board where you're not a control investor. You have to use your words very carefully and be very persuasive to have influence. And you have to use and build trust over a period of time. I think the same is true in your family environment. And you know, it's reminding me maybe of a fourth thing from your first question. One of the other things I always tried to do is to always, could we have a good time without spending a lot of money? And I did that in part because I wanted my kids to be able to pursue whatever career, life path they wanted. And if they could always go biking, hiking, whatever, without it costing money, like scuba diving, they could be happy and find fulfillment. So I I don't know. I haven't given it as much thought, but I think there's many more similarities of them strengthening each other, Luke, than them seeing
Totally.
something in a board meeting, because the dynamic is different than in a family environment. I have noticed when my kids were younger, when we'd go places, I'm a foodie. I would pick out the places we go for dinner or lunch because I try to find experiences, and I get made fun of. My batting record is not 100, 1,000. And my kids remind me when we're at Hole in the Walls or places that got great Yelp reviews that closed down. But now I see them also developing these kinds of skills. And it's not because I said you should do this. It just happens. Right. It just happens because they see the joy, the communication that happens when you spend time together with people you love. And a lot of that happens over breaking bread.
I feel like we're going to send you a version of Kitchen Confidential.
Having been able to observe a lot of different professional environments and situations, have you observed any other like do's and don'ts for individual dads? So you've seen men at the executive level, and you've been able to observe them. And we have listeners who are in similar situations and are trying to figure out the balance and where they like, and what their value system is and all of that. Like, what have you observed?
To me, family comes first. That comes before the job. I think you have to understand what your values are. I have seen some people put their job first. That usually doesn't end well for their relationships. So if you put your family first, and as a CEO or chairman of the board, you have to model the right kinds of behaviors, that makes it easier for you to do the right thing. I've seen plenty of situations where CEOs did not do the right thing, tried to scratch my head and understand why, try to talk to them about it, try to talk to maybe the chairman of the board or another board member who had influence about it. But when you've seen these situations, each company's board, you've seen an N of one. As Luke could tell you, I don't know what the Redox board was like, but there's some people I know on that board. These are good people. You're in a good place. You could learn. But there are plenty of boards that were not good, that didn't make the right decision in the best interest of the company, but were focused more on their own individual instance. And you store those memories away too, because as Ben Franklin once said, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation, but an instant to lose it.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating to hear you. Your comment is making me reflect on what it's like to try and, because as a CEO, especially as a first-time CEO, the whole question of what are my values are not clear, right? Like usually you're coming of age in the same kind of way your company is coming of age. And then I hadn't thought about it in this way, but the context of who is on the board is actually a huge part of it, right? In terms of what's going to be supported, what's going to be pushed back on, whether openly or kind of subversively. It's a fascinating, I hadn't thought about the kind of influence of the board when it comes to that kind of stuff.
I tell folks, Luke, when you pick an investor, you should think of it as a marriage, because it's not a 6 months where it's a multi-year deal. And you should spend enough time, do the diligence, get to know them, break bread, talk to them about family and values, because these are people whose input you're going to be signing up to take and incorporate 100%. Into the direction of the business.
Yeah, and I think in many ways part of my reflection was a sense of just feeling lucky because I foregone conclusion, I guess.
But you didn't diligence that up front. That you just got lucky.
I mean, I thought I diligenced it, right, as much as I could. But again, I talked to, I did the thing, right? You talk to every CEO who you can find who's worked with that person. But at the end of the day, there's still some level of luck because you never really know until you're in seat and you're not up and to the right. That's where you really find out.
The way that translates into family life is folks would hear you at the dinner table, right, talking about what you did. And my kids know when you make big decisions, you do your homework and due diligence.
For sure.
Right? So that's part of, the interesting thing is that around my dinner table when I was growing up, my parents would ask, how was your day? And there'd be silence because two boys, we didn't talk that much. We wanted to go out and play. My house with two girls, how was your day? I was done. I just got to listen about, every detail. And we got to really feel like we knew the kids in their grade and their friends. And
that's amazing.
It's really nice stuff. Because family dinners were important. If I wasn't traveling, I was home at 5 o'clock for dinners.
Were there other business principles that you tried to translate? So you mentioned the importance of diligence in big decisions. Was there other key concepts that you tried to translate for them?
I think so. I think I always tried to treat people with respect. Mm-hmm. So in companies, it's not always up and to the right. When times are tough, a lot of folks keep their cards closer to the vest. We would try, at least what I advocated for and I tried to do, is be a transparent communicator and consider all angles, both those who were participating, those who weren't, those who were doing well, those who weren't, to try to come up with a solution that treated everybody fairly. Now, in a bad situation, folks aren't going to be happy, but to put your perspective out there, I always tried to do that. And when things don't go well at home, try to talk about them. So it's just treating people with respect, I think, is a really big deal. Doing your diligence, investing in your reputation, mission orientation, right? Most venture investors are not mission oriented. I worked for a not-for-profit hospital system. It got me closer to the mission, and that made me feel good. That made me feel like I was closer to where folks need help. And both of my daughters are pursuing healthcare careers. They want to help people. So did I talk about that? No, but does it make me feel good that they're continuing this mission orientation to help patients in need? Yeah, it makes me feel real good. I'm a real proud dad, and one of the reasons I feel optimistic about our future is I've met their friends, and their friends are well-intentioned, good people too. We just need to move from getting these 80-year-olds out of senior office and start to turn it over to the younger people.
Couldn't agree more. If only this was a political podcast.
And that's as close as we'll get to politics.
You've mentioned it a few times, but I think the way I've heard you describe it is you put in 150% during the week when it was, time for your job, and then, when you were home, you were really dedicated to your family. How did you do that? I mean, it's coming from somebody who's attempted to do that, and I would say probably didn't do it very well. What were the key things that really allowed you to be running at 150 miles an hour on one side, and then to be present with your family on the other side?
So part of it was the work aspect, which is I had a great team who I trusted, who could do stuff. And I figured out a way to get done what I needed to do during the week. So the weekends were set up for the kids. So like when we moved to St. Louis, my kids were young. Like Saturday mornings, I would take my kids to First Watch for breakfast every Saturday. So my wife could sleep late and have a lazy morning. They asked me to coach the basketball teams. I had two daughters. I had to treat them the same. So I said, the only day I know I'm going to be home is Friday nights. So if you want to have practice Friday nights, I could be your coach. So I coached both daughters' teams for like 4 or 5 years. Wow. We had practices Friday nights. So you just figure out a way to make it work. If we didn't have plans, well, we're going out for dinner, the four of us, and we're going to give you like these mini adult experiences. And that to me is how I did it.
Something I like to ask sort of in combination with this topic is then how did you think about your own care for yourself, making sure that you're in the right state, both for the work and for the family? Like, where did you fit yourself into that?
So for me, I think everyone needs a release, a place where the mind turns off. And for me, until I was 55, it was playing basketball. So when I lived in New York City, I organized a Saturday pickup game with 15 to 20 guys every Saturday for an hour and a half. When I moved to St. Louis, I got introduced to guys, and I organized a game on Wednesday evenings. That became my camaraderie, exercise, clear the head, and it does wonders. You need that. That is how I dealt with it. I encouraged everyone, and I still do, to find your release, find your happy place. So we go on vacation every year with my parents. We went to the same place because it brought everyone happiness.
Now that you're 56, what do you do?
I'm a little older than that, but now I've been playing tennis, Mike. And I, unfortunately, not as well as I played basketball.
Singles or doubles?
I play a little of both. I play singles one day a week and doubles one day a week.
What has doubles taught you about communication?
Pick the right partner.
I'm picturing you working on your backhand, and you're like, "This is not my happy place. This is not my happy place."
So all the listeners out there, tennis is a great sport because you could play it as you get older. Start your kids when they're young. Yeah. Start your kids when they're young, because I was too busy playing baseball, and I should have invested the time in tennis because I'd be so much better today.
Talk about playing the long game.
It's a St. Louis thing, Luke. If this were New York, it doesn't happen that way.
Could you talk a little bit more about just the dads, daughters, and dating?
Yeah. It's a great question.
So I'm not the best expert on this because my oldest daughter has been dating the same boy for 8 years and engaged. The younger daughter, first boyfriend, 5 years, and now living together. Now, were there boys lurking who we didn't like? Yes. And you've got to just, and this is where my wife's got an incredible skill of communicating some of this stuff in ways the kids understand without her saying, no, don't do that. So my wife is an amazing communicator. She used to be in marketing and sales in the for an ad agency. And one of her gifts is the ability to tell you news you don't want to hear with a smile on her face and for it to sink in. So she is the communicator extraordinaire in our family. And she had to have a few conversations because, you got to see it more in high school than college when they were around to see what was going on. My wife got really involved with my daughters and their friends so she could play that role and make sure she could give good advice. Right? I was the coach. I was the fun guy. I was one of the few dads who'd go on Girl Scout campouts where it would get dark and they'd say, you go to the men's bunk. Oh, you can't sleep with all these young girls. So all the guys would be snoring in the men's bunk.
CPAP Central.
Set a perimeter for the bears.
Would these be situations, and I'm going to get a little tactical only because I think every dad who has a daughter, myself included, my partner in crime here included, is kind of dreading these situations. Was there a literal conversation between you and your wife? It's like, we got to get this guy out. Like, how intentional was it versus how kind of in the moment or responding, to the scenario?
So this is my wife's gift. I didn't get pulled into those a lot. I would periodically say, something doesn't seem right about that one. She's like, I'm on it. It's being taken care of. My wife, this is her forte. She should create a business advising moms.
We've always wondered if we should have like after six or so months, we invite the moms to have like a point counterpoint.
That would be good, Luke.
We haven't had the guts to venture there yet. It might scare away all of our guests.
That is true. But the interviews would need to be conducted by your significant others.
Yeah, exactly. That's nerve-wracking. Part of having a child getting engaged is it's like this turning of the page. And I'm wondering what it was like, because you've gone, it sounds like you very intentionally built this like very tight-knit, close family unit. And relatively recently, everybody was in the house. Now they're living with their significant other. Like, how has that transition been for you and for your wife?
So to me, the first thing is, I think you gotta, the foundation is family. So when this went down, my dad was here from New York.
Oh, wow.
The ring was my mom's stone. And home is home. So one of my daughters lives in St. Louis. She's starting her clinical rotation in a few weeks. So she's got some downtime. She moved back in with us with her boyfriend. Why? She goes, because when I'm not in school, I want to go home. It's my comforting place. It's my happy place. And creating that environment is what it's about. I still feel that way when I go back and visit my dad. He lives in the house that I lived in when I went to high school. I always have warm feelings there. And I think our job as parents is to protect, but prepare for the future. And if there's something safe about being home, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool to hear. That's to protect and to prepare. I love that. I think that's really cool. One of the ways where we go kind of at this point is to ask, looking forward, what are your dreams for your kids?
Yeah,
what do you want for their future?
Wonderful question. I think fundamentally you want them to be happy. You want them to be fulfilled. You want them to have impact in a way that they want to have impact on the world, whether it's bringing children into the world or having impact with how they spend their time. That to me is what I dream about. You know, when my oldest daughter was like 3 or 4, said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She said, "President." Now, I don't think she's going to be president. She won't be who knows? But you want them to be able to dream and continue to dream. You want them to be able to laugh and have fun. And you want them to be healthy, right? Health is the one thing that's mostly out of our control. You got some genetic factors. It's in our control a bit, but with health, with picking a good spouse or partner, that's the most important decision I think you make in your life. If you do that job and do it well, then the world's your oyster. You could go any place you want to go.
Is there anything that you grapple with at this point? Like you're at a fundamentally different stage than I am, for instance. I'm just curious, when you're sitting by yourself, if there's stuff you grapple with, or what is the person in your position thinking about?
Mike, I went on this personal journey after I left my job, and I said, am I going to retire? What am I going to do? And I went to South by Southwest, and I concluded a few things. I said, I'm not the retiring type. Business and healthcare are my hobbies. I said, number 2, I feel this personal obligation to fix healthcare still, because I don't want to get older and sick in this healthcare system. Yeah. I said, number 3, what gave me great satisfaction? What got me motivated? It was working with entrepreneurs. It was working with people and helping them realize their full potential. And then I said, who's got the hardest job out there? It's the entrepreneur. So what I've done is I've I'm spending my time advising entrepreneurs, mostly in healthcare, and helping them increase their probability of success. I do it because it's rewarding, because I'm hopefully making a difference and having impact. Impact changes over time, and this is a way to keep mentally engaged, keep learning, stay curious, and it can be very rewarding if you connect with the right entrepreneurs who are trying to advance the ball with a big vision.
How did you decide or come upon that framework? Because this is venturing a tad outside sort of the fathering experience from the parental perspective, but we're all going to continue aging. We're all likely to experience career shifts over the course of that timeline. And today, the probability is that men end up with a poor relationship with their spouse, they're dissatisfied with their career, and they don't have any friends. It seems like you have avoided all of those things. So I'm curious how you mentioned, leaving your job and kind of moving into this other career situation. What would you tell other men who are going through or eventually will go through that as well? Like, all of us are going to experience that.
I think the first thing is you got to be self-aware. You got to know who you are and what your strengths are, where your gaps are, what you need. I think I've got one of my friends is a big sales guy. He needs to be around people all the time. When I go see him, he's always around people. You got to know yourself first. Second, you got to figure out what moves the cheese for you, what gets you motivated, and try to put yourself in those situations. So one of the things I now do, my wife plays canasta. I picked it up while they were training, so I now play canasta with my wife.
I have no idea what that is.
Look it up. It's a card game.
Cards.
So
Do
wife,
I spell that with a K?
No, with a C. Oh, God.
Glad we're not recording this in person.
So my wife, once a quarter, 19 women and me get together for an event of
awesome.
canasta and cuisine, and we eat and play canasta. I'm the only guy there.
That's amazing.
I'm grateful that they include me. But I've always liked cards. So is this surprising? No, I'm competitive, right? So you figure it out. As I said at the outset, it doesn't always make sense when you're living it, but when you get a little distance, it comes together perfectly. You got to really do an honest self-assessment, and that's where I think people fall down. And it's not just you, it's talking to those who you interact with.
Yeah.
Right? How many folks after Luke, you left, came to you and said, how could I have been a better board member? My guess is not many. You got to be self-aware. You got to do 360s on your life with your coworkers, with those who work for you. How do they see you? I think there's a real opportunity in self-help for those really interested.
I think that's really, really well said. And I would agree with you that is a part of this kind of the story of our life. Skipping that step is very easy because that step can be painful at times and scary at times.
I mean, Mike, don't get me wrong. I'm not perfect. My life isn't ideal, but it's pretty darn good. And I'm appreciative of that. And I want to share some of that wisdom because I've got these unique experiences. I feel pretty fortunate. Most of my friends from college are all married to their first spouses. Very few divorces in that group. Pretty surprising. Most of our friends here are still married to the same spouse from when their kids were in elementary school. So we feel pretty fortunate that way.
When you get together with those folks, what questions about life do you ask each other right now?
The big question is, are you going to stay in St. Louis or where are you going to go? St. Louis is a great place. Family friendly, low cost of living, friendly people. But it gets god awful hot here in the summer. That to me, the big question is, you still in St. Louis, Matt? When are you leaving? Where are you going? And I'm like, a lot will depend on where my kids end up. A lot will depend on where my kids end up. And if we're willing to travel back to St. Louis.
Is that basically the primary pillar then for that decision? Like, how do you and your partner talk about that?
Wonderful question. So I think there's two strategies you could deploy, Mike. You could take we're going to go where we want to be that we hope the kids will want to visit. And for us, our happy place is Longboat Key, Florida. So we thought about that strategy. And the other strategy is stay here, and kids will continue to come back home because of those feelings of warmth and being enclosed in a womb-like home setting. And then the third strategy is see where the kids end up and go to one of those places. Those are I think, 3 strategies on the table. Mm-hmm. And right now, one of our daughters lives 10 minutes away. So we don't have to decide what we're going to do. And it may end up being we stay in St. Louis, and if we want to go to Longboat Key for a month, we do that.
Do you discuss this with the kids? Like, do they know that this is do they know those 3 strategies?
I don't know if I've ever articulated it as crisply as I just did, but they know these are the strategy. These are potential strategies being contemplated. They've all got their opinions. So we live in a very transparent, surprisingly transparent household.
Yeah, that's awesome. Where we typically like to go to wrap up is to ask, imagine you're talking to somebody who's about to have their first kid or just had their first kid. What would be your advice to them as they get ready for this ride of fatherhood?
Enjoy the journey, because it's the most exciting, fun thing you'll ever do. It will have ups and downs. It will challenge you in incredible ways. But it is, to me, the lasting legacy that each of us will leave on this earth. So make sure you do your job and leave the world in a better place than we found it.
That's awesome. Well, Matt, we want to thank you so much for taking the time today to go deep on so many different subjects, to help Mike learn about canasta, to help us understand
got a lot of work to do.
Your 3-pronged strategy on to move or not to move. And just want to say we really appreciate you and your time. So thank you so much.
It's
Thank
great
you
to be
very
with
much.
you both, and good to see you again, Luke. Nice to meet you, Mike.
Before you bounce, I have a quick favor. Please subscribe to the pod. Not only does Luke love juicing those numbers, but it really does help put this thing in front of more dads.
And Mike, on the other hand, just loves juicing. We also now run a listener community on WhatsApp. To join, visit dadpod.fm, and you'll see the delicious link at the top of the homepage.
Come on in, baby. We'd love to have you.